To be honest, I was quite intimidated by the idea of fictionalizing it. At that point, I mean, this is my debut novel. I've never published a novel before, but I will tell you that I wrote 3 novels before this that never got published, which I now think of as my, practice novels. And I'm very glad I did, because I wouldn't have been ready to write this before that experience. With To Die Beautiful, I really, when I first found out about Hani Shaft, who's the main character in the book, I was not in the mindset of I'm looking for somebody to write a book about. It was December of 2016. It was a pretty fraught time in international politics. Brexit vote had just happened, and England had left the European Union. Donald Trump had just been elected in the United States. That was a big shocker and destabilizing thing. And I went to Amsterdam over the winter break of that winter. And I had some friends and kind of extended family there, although I'm not Dutch and I don't have any, I don't read or speak Dutch, but fortunately, most people there speak English. So I was there, and a friend of mine who is a historian and a scholar in the Netherlands said, why don't we go to the Museum of Resistance? You probably haven't been there because not that many people know about it, but it's in Amsterdam. And she said, there is this woman there, you should write a book about her. And I just thought, okay, people say this to writers a lot, and usually it's about their Uncle Frank or something, and I said, okay, let's go. We went, and it's a great museum, just reopened, and it is about people who have fought in resistance to mostly to World War II and the Nazis. And there was this very small little display, just one little box that had a photograph of 2 people in it, a young woman who was clearly kind of dolled up and had a little scarf on and looked really cute, and somebody next to her who looked like maybe a young man with her. And then there was a pair of spectacles, just a pair of glasses, and a really beat up old gun, like a little pistol, black pistol. And it said, the woman in the photo is Hani Shaft. She was a college student who quit school to join the Dutch resistance and became a noted assassin of Nazi officers and, Nazi collaborators during World War II. And I thought, what? Like, who is this incredible badass woman? And my friend said, this is the person I'm talking about. You should write a book about her. She indeed was a college student who kind of dropped everything to save her friends and to try to save the Netherlands from the Germans. And I was really taken with her. She was so young. And so my first thought was, well, great. When we finish it at this museum, I'll go to the little bookshop in the museum and buy the biography of Hani Shaft and find out all about her. And I was shocked to find out that there was no book about Hani Shaft. Not even in Dutch at that point. There had been books. I eventually found out there had been a pretty big biography of her in the 1970s in Dutch. And there had even been a film about her called The Girl with the Red Hair. That came out around 1980, but that was also in Dutch. It had never been dubbed or anything, subtitled, as far as I know. And I was just shocked because I just thought this woman was such a, her story was, what I could find out about it was sort of, stranger than fiction, just an incredible ripping yarn of a World War II story. And so I started doing more research and realized there weren't any books in English about her. And I thought, well, this is it. I'm a historian. I know how to do research. I'll write a biography of her. And that actually was my intention initially, was I was going to just write a straight ahead nonfiction biography of her. And I would say for the first year and a half I worked on the book, that was my intent. But then as I got more into it, I started to come up against this obstacle, which was she really hardly left anything of herself behind, unlike somebody like Anne Frank, for example, who's probably the best known, victim of the Dutch Holocaust. We know about Anne Frank because she left that incredible diary. Without it, we wouldn't know her story. And Hani Shaft was not, she didn't leave a diary. There are a few letters. She didn't ever give interviews in her life because she was not famous, and it would have been dangerous anyway because she was basically living underground. So at that point, my literary agent said, well, have you ever thought about writing it as a novel? And I really hadn't considered it, but then I started thinking about it, and I realized if I wanted any dialogue in the book, I was going to have to fictionalize it, like and a book without dialogue, it can be kind of dry, in my experience. So that was kind of where the book took a turn toward fiction at that point. I was intimidated just on an artistic level by the idea of writing a novel. And I also was intimidated as a historian and just as a human being about the responsibility of telling the stories of real people, especially during such a harrowing time in history. It's a big responsibility. And I kind of hemmed and hawed about it for a while, and then thankfully rediscovered the book Schindler's List by Thomas Keneally. We've all heard of it. And I went back to Schindler's List and I started reading interviews that Keneally had done around the time the book came out, which was in the early 80s. And actually in the introduction to the original version of the book, and I think it's still in the current editions of Schindler's List, he actually has this very lengthy author's note at the beginning in which he discusses his own process of writing the book Schindler's List, because as many of us think of Schindler's List as a nonfiction account of what happened with Oskar Schindler. It's in fact a novel. It's a historical novel about Schindler. And in his author's note, he talks about his process of deciding to turn it into a novel. Basically, he was approached by survivors who had benefited from Schindler, who he met in Los Angeles randomly one day, who kind of pressed upon him this story and said, somebody needs to write a book about this. And he thought, I'll write a nonfiction book, and had gone through the exact same process I was going through, which was started to do all this research as if you were going to write a fully documented nonfiction book, then came to the realization that it was probably not going to really come alive for the reader without some light fictionalization, mostly in the form of dialogue, to bring these characters to life. And how then he also went through a crisis of, am I really the person to do this? This is a big responsibility. Finally decided that the story was so important, he wanted to go ahead and try. And that letter really gave me I felt like gave me permission in a way, not to say my book is Schindler's List or I'm Thomas Keneally, but just that this is something that's, appropriate to do. And so from that point on, I decided to try writing it as a novel from Hani's point of view. And, essentially just kind of gave myself parameters, which were, I wasn't going to exaggerate anything that, because there was really no need to. Her story was already so incredible without it. There are a few characters in the book who I decided to make sort of composite characters, just because the real people were either impossible to find out any information about, or there were like several people who I kind of combined to make an important figure. But overall, everybody in the book, in my book, ultimately, they're the real names of the real people. Even the Nazis, who are the Nazi officers, especially toward the end of the book, play a bigger role. Those are their real names, and so I thought, I'm going to do this because I feel it's an important story, and I want as many people as possible to have access to it, and so that's kind of how that came about. And I'm very happy in the end that I did it that way. I eventually got over my, fear of doing it, but I will say it was a huge relief to me when the descendants of some of the real people in the book read the book, and they've all been really happy with it and very positive. So that was just a huge relief for me as an author. It's funny because, as we sort of touched on a bit earlier, we're in a moment in our culture where, people are getting criticized and canceled for all sorts of things. And as I was working on the edits to this book with my editor at Dutton, Maya Zeev, who's awesome, occasionally I would say, listen, Maya, please tell me if there's anything in this book that I'm going to get, nailed to the cross for, because I just can't see it because I'm too close. And she was like, I think we're still okay with killing Nazis. I think we're still, that's still okay. And, frankly, I did feel, my own family left Europe, my own Jewish family left Europe before the Holocaust, but they were run out of Russia by similar anti-Semitic pogroms in Russia, and many of them died trying to flee. So I definitely have that feeling in my own family history very strongly of, my ancestors having been persecuted for their ethnic identity, religious identity, that kind of thing. And I think that, Hani Shaft herself, she's not Jewish. And she does all of these things both to help her Jewish friends and also simply because she feels like it's the right thing to do. And I could really, I could just really relate to that, as you feel so helpless. You see, even in our own time, terrible things happening all around us that are racially motivated or, whatever, religiously motivated violence. And it was cathartic on some level, for sure, to be writing from the point of view of somebody who is just like, I don't care. Like, now I'm going to stand up and do something about it,